Well, here I go, interrupting good discussion again. It seems to be my fate. But thank you again for joining us on the tour. We've got, I hope, short presentation. It seems like every time I turned around, we are adding something to it. We wanted to share some good information, particularly after our last couple of meetings. It seems oftentimes more of the questions and the discussion center around the convention centers and the building and financial performance. And so we thought that this time, when we had a chance to meet with you, we would spend a little bit more time, or all of our time, on the convention centers. So thank you for taking the time today. And it's September, and 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 2008 in September was our first event in these centers. So the buildings are 8 years old. Who remembers what the very first event in these centers was?
Wow.
Bill, you don't count. Sarah Palin, yes. It was her rally. And in fact, the building was not scheduled to open until October. But one of the rallying cries that we had that whole year was, we're ahead of budget and on time. And in fact, we were even ahead of schedule because the buildings did open early for that event in September of 2008. Take you back just a ways. Since that time, I hope that you can appreciate the appearance of the buildings. We take meeting planners through here very regularly. In fact, just yesterday, I was with a group of meeting planners. We have a nice group of planners in town who, among them, represent about $12 million of potential future business. They came through the building yesterday, and it never fails. They all are astonished that the building is 8 years old, and it is a testament to the stewardship, both with SMG and with Bill's leadership, on the priority that we put on taking care of these facilities and making sure that they show quite well. Real quickly, I'm going to start off, and then both Chris Swalling and Bill Dugdale will also share a little bit of information. But I just wanted to give you an overview of kind of the relationship between the parties involved, and then we'll go into a little more detail. But certainly Visit Anchorage has a contract with the municipality as the manager of the buildings, of the facilities, including the Denina and the Egan Center. Sometimes people think that our oversight also includes some of the other facilities, such as Ben Boki and the Sullivan. It does not. We are convention center oriented, and that's where our responsibilities end, thank goodness, because I know nothing about laying down ice. But we do take our role in overseeing the convention centers very seriously. So we're responsible for submitting and keeping to the annual budgets, and we're responsible for the contract that we have with SMG. Civic Ventures is in the room, and you'll hear from Chris next. Civic Ventures is the financial oversight group. It's a board of 5 that represents primarily municipal employees. Chris has been the one constant, I think, now on the board ever since the board was formed, and he certainly is a great liaison to our board, and will briefly walk us through the financials of how the financing and the bonds were structured and how those are performing right now. I can tell you they're performing quite well, and the folks who put together the feasibility study for this building from a financing perspective did a very good job by us who now live with the buildings, in that it was very conservative and certainly has been achievable for us to work within the parameters set up in the financing model. And then SMG, we've heard from Phyllis today. We got the tour. SMG is a national operator in our responsibility of managing the buildings rather than taking on the operations role ourselves and hiring a bunch of new staff. We looked around and we said we've got some experts in this community already, and we've entered into a contract with SMG for operations of the building. And it was a competitively let out contract. So we had a few different bidders over the years, and SMG has always risen to the top for a number of reasons. So before I talk further about our role, I thought maybe I could bring Chris Smalling up to walk us through the complicated buckets and the waterfall, as we call it. And he'll be walking you through the blue and orange handout that we left on your table. Oh, real quickly, so I can give this prop back. Also, Anita handed these out if you're not familiar with them. We've got the business cards of Chris, Bill, myself in here, but they're real handy if you want to stick them to the back of your cell phone. And you can put credit cards, driver's licenses, whatever you want, business cards, and always have it handy as long as you have your cell phone with you. So with that, Chris, thank you.
Good afternoon. While Julie was talking about some early history, I thought it triggered a memory that the bed tax in Anchorage, when it was first proposed, I think it was Mayor George Sullivan that proposed the bed tax, and he proposed a bed tax that was simply going to go to the general fund of the municipality, and that particular ballot issue failed, and the industry came back to the mayor and said, what if we do a joint kind of bed tax, that a portion of it goes to the municipality and a portion of it goes to the promotion of the visitor industry. And so that was passed, and my memory is that was a 5% tax. And after a year or so that was working so well, the industry came and said, let's move that tax to be an 8% tax, 4% for promotion of the visitor industry and 4% for the general fund. So that bed tax and that 8% with that 50-50 split between the municipality and the industry, has worked very well since the early 80s and continued. And then with the opportunity to see what we could do in terms of having a new convention center, the concept of increasing the bed tax to the present 12% bed tax, with 1/3 of that dedicated to the funding of the new facility, and then the other 8% on that historical basis continued. And so that's really the basis of the 12% bed tax that we have today. And when I'm making these remarks, I don't have anything specifically prepared, so if you have any questions, please interrupt me and I'll try and clarify anything that I might have said or respond to any questions. So we have the 12% bed tax, and that is allocated 1/3 to the municipality general fund, 1/3 is dedicated to destination marketing, and through a contract with Visit Anchorage, that money goes to Visit Anchorage. And then there's a third that goes basically through to the trustee of holding the bonds, so that we can service the appropriate debts. And Civic Ventures, which has been described, is the municipal corporation that was formed to oversee the issuance of the bonds and the financial activity with respect to those bonds. So the money that comes into Civic Ventures for that first is required to establish a debt service reserve fund of approximately $8 million, which is there to supplant any failure of being able to meet the bond indebtedness. There's also another fund that is set up from the collection of the annual tax once that reserve fund is set, to be able to pay the annual bond service on the debt. And so that amount will build up to be several millions of dollars, and then for each year, as the money is required to make the bond payments in March and September, then that fund is nearly depleted and then restored each year from the collection of the bed tax. Monies in excess of that then goes into a operating reserve fund held for maintenance and improvements within the building, and the facilities committee that we have members here help direct how that's going to be done. And so as either improvements or equipment replacement, et cetera, need to be done either in this facility or in the Egan, that works its way through the facilities committee, and through the civic board and then through the municipal contracting for ultimate, and then assembly approval for ultimate spending of any of the money out of that reserve. If for some reason the civic was not able to meet its bond obligations through this process, there is an obligation that Visit Anchorage would be required to step in and out of its share of the bed tax support the bond indebtedness. And if they failed, ultimately the general fund, or the money allocated to the general fund, could also be used to service that bond debt. When the bonds were originally planned and issued, I believe it was about $103 million was the original bond issue, and the debt service was planned based upon the bed tax with about a 2% growth over the period of the bond life. And the bonds were issued before the project actually came online. And so there was the bed tax started before the bonds actually came online. And so there was the ability to build up some of the reserve for the bond indebtedness before the building was actually in place. So we've had that substantial $8 million debt reserve in place since the beginning, and all of the portion of the 4% portion of the bed tax has fully funded the bond indebtedness payments as we've gone forward. The 2% growth that was projected in the bed tax has held fairly well, except after the 2008 financial crisis. There was a dip in terms of the bed tax overall, but that was still, the bed tax collected was still within that plan of that 2% growth. And so we've always been able to meet that target relative to the financial plan, and the result is, I think, that we've got a building that's been well maintained over the 8 years that it's been in service. The other interesting news recently is we had an opportunity to refinance the bond indebtedness, and that was accomplished in the latter part of August. And with the reissuance of the bonds, or the defeasance of those bonds, the savings over the remaining 23 years of bond life is $17 million. And the present value of that savings is a little over $9 million. And so those savings are going to be captured inside of this closed system, if you will. And so there will be ultimately monies available to continue to maintain and improve this facility and the Egan Center. So that's was really great news as part of that. And interestingly, as part of the analysis of that reissuance of those bonds, the credit rating relative to the bonds was actually increased, and that was also gave a boost to the successful refinancing of those bonds. So I'd be happy to respond to any other questions you might have. There is a flow chart that's on the table that gives a summary of the activity. Pat?
Presumably debt service reserve fund remains at $8 million, and therefore any excess savings goes into the capital reserve fund, correct?
It goes into the operating reserve fund, and then it trickles down into the capital reserve fund, and the monies spent out of that capital reserve fund have to go through the process of the facilities committee, the Denina board, municipal contracting, and ultimately to the assembly.
What roughly, I'm sure you don't have enough rough facts, may not, what roughly is the capital reserve at?
I think it's about $1 million today.
It's a little higher. Yeah, I think it's around 4.
Okay. Well,
We did have a contract. So my colleague will tell you a bit of a data flow. And so obviously we want to maintain the facilities in excellent condition. But, and I'm not going to be around 23 years when it's finally pay off these bonds. But it would be interesting at least have some discussion around accelerating bond repayment with the idea that if we're able to do that, we could then maybe reduce the bed tax back to 12 to 10%, but boost the take another percent for Visit Anchorage and another percent for general fund, and we're all in a better place.
So the ability to repay the bonds early is contained within the contract, and so within Civic we have continuing to have discussions about how much is appropriate in reserve funds, if and when is it appropriate to prepay the bond debt and pay it down early. So that is, the money can go into the physical structures, or it can go ultimately to prepay the bond debt. And so that will be the responsibility of Civic, and then with the approval of the municipality going forward.
My takeaway for you is if we could get a periodic report on what your analysis is of that.
Sure.
Just because it is something that several of us have expressed interest in avoiding interest payments
Right.
in the future.
Right. So, the first opportunity to do something significant with the indebtedness was this past year. And so refinancing those and achieving the potential savings, we think it was a wonderful achievement and really complement the municipal finance people in terms of being alert to that opportunity and pursuing it. So, that's a great benefit for the community in terms of that. And we will actively look at whether prepayment of the bonds makes fiscal sense. Yes, Ellie?
Thank you. I'm Ellie Bridge.
Right.
Nice to meet you. I just want to say thank you for doing such a good job managing this facility under Civic Ventures. This is a success story. It really is. This building is
Oh, it is.
a success story. And I'm really personally happy that it happened under Senator Beggage's watch. But also, Mr. Train and I have been involved with National League of Cities. Anchorage has been a member for 55 years. But
Sure.
We've been actively involved with National League of Cities since 1999, if not sooner. And right now, Visit Anchorage is pursuing having their fall event here in Anchorage, and I'm really happy about that because we finally have a facility that can house 2,000 to 3,000 folks for an event. So again, thank you very much.
The proposal, the concept to be able to have a larger facility was made evidence with the success that was with Egan, but the community outgrew Egan, and there was a lot of discussion in the years of planning this facility whether or not such a large facility would work for the community. But I think it's demonstrated we can hold and host large groups like you're describing, but we're also able to be flexible and having multiple groups of different sizes. So, if you had a group of 1,000 people, that took over the Egan and you were done. But right now we can have a 700-person group and an 800-person group, and you can move those around between the facilities and really accommodate more convention business. So it has worked as the people putting the plan together expected. So thank you for your comments. And I hope that those delegates come. Any other questions?
For our finance guy before. Great, thank you, Chris. And I'll introduce Bill in just a moment here, but thank you for your comments. I do believe this is truly a success story, and you try to picture 9-10 years ago what we did without this building. I was counting on the way over here. This is my 6th event in this building this week alone. So it's amazing. I think I'm probably spending a little more time than your typical Anchorage resident, but the buildings are very well utilized, and Bill will provide some information to that as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what is our interest. Why was Visit Anchorage very interested in making sure that we had the management contract for these buildings way back 8 or 9 years ago. And to start, I want to let you know that there is no financial benefit to us. In fact, there's a cost from a staff time and a management perspective in having that management responsibility. That was not our motive at all. Our motive was really to be able to control the quality of what we have a responsibility to sell. And so as we're bringing meeting planners into this building, as we're talking to folks who are thinking about bringing groups up here, we wanted to be able to say, we can promise you that 4 years from now, when your group arrives, the food service is going to be fabulous as you're experiencing today. The buildings will look beautiful as they do today. And the other component into that is we also wanted to have control of the calendar. And that sounds like a minor thing, but really in selling conventions and selling community groups, it's very important to us. And so how it works between us and SMG, if it's 12 months or further away, we can control the calendar. In other words, Phyllis and her staff can't sell anything into 2016 or 17 or 18. Community events have to book within a year window. And the reason for that is, and I think we talked about this when we last met on the tourism promotion contract as well, is we want to manage these buildings to be as successfully profitable as possible. They do operate at a net operating loss, and that was known when the bonds went out and when the community voted on it, and it's very typical for a convention center. Our motive is not to have funds flow to the bottom line and have a profit for the buildings. Our motive is to manage as fiscally responsible as we can while making sure these buildings have the biggest impact to our community as possible, an economic impact. And we do that by being able to offer large groups to come in and use the buildings from outside, bringing that outside money into our community. And so that's why the calendar management was important to us. So if it's a group looking at 2016, 17, 18, we know that we can look at dates that are important to that group. We can sell those dates and then work with SMG for things like our own banquet. We're very flexible. We can have it on this Saturday or that Saturday. But we did not want the building being tied up for one evening on a Saturday that could stop a group from coming in for 5 days that includes that Saturday. And so that's where we manage with the calendar, and that was something that was important to us, and certainly important in working with especially the larger groups that demand all of the space, like AFN, those type of groups. We can't have simultaneous other events taking place in the building. We have a few conflicts like that right now. We hope to get to a point where there's even more conflicts and we have to manage the calendar even more tightly. But the buildings are quite well used, and we look across SMG's portfolio every once in a while to see how we compare to other communities and how they're utilizing their convention centers. As Chris alluded to, we also, at the time of the bonds going out and the vote, we have, as they say, skin in the game. If you look on the flow chart there, not only are we the backstop in case something doesn't work in the model, we also upfront agreed to a contribution. It started off at $500,000 the first year, but it's formula-based based on the growth of the bed tax. And for 2016, we're contributing from the tourism promotion funds about $750,000 that goes direct towards the debt service. So there was a few reasons why we thought it was a good ask for us to be able to manage these buildings. What else did I want to share with you? As I mentioned, the economic impact, we look well beyond the walls of this building on how we're managing, and we want to make sure that we're bringing in groups that provide to the community and provide through all of Anchorage rather than just providing to the bottom line of the buildings. And so that's a very different philosophy than a private contractor coming in and having just a straight operational duty to the building. And that's where Bill comes into a great deal. Our success, any given year, we sell about $100 million in future economic impact. That future might be 2 months from now if we have a small meeting that wants to come in very quickly. That future might be as far out as 2021, and we do have some meetings already scheduled that far out. And we're typically bidding on meetings that will be coming in for 3 to 5 years out, I would say, is more typical for our larger national and international meetings, but some do book out quite a bit further than that. And with that, as I mentioned earlier during the introductions, we realized very quickly as construction of the buildings was happening and as we were looking at some of the policy issues that we knew we'd be dealing with within the confines of this building, that we didn't necessarily have the talent on staff of a marketing organization. So we looked to our community to find out somebody with really strong operations skills to oversee the contract with SMG for us and to oversee the operations of the building. And that's Bill Dugdale. And I just wanted him to share a little bit from the operations side with you today. So,
Before
yes.
you go,
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
You bet.
And I'm pretty sure you can answer this.
Okay.
Okay. Although our community embraced the president's visit, there were some comments and concerns about the cost, the $500,000 cost. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact on this community, the economic impact on this community?
Great question.
Because of this visit.
Yes, and I can share a little bit with you, and I'll have more complete information. We are compiling that as we speak. Certainly, right now, a couple of things that we look at is the ad equivalency, the value of the media that came along with the president, and right now, because our cutoff was right at the first of the month versus, so we have through August 31st. Through August 31st, the value of media to Anchorage, so this doesn't include all the media that happened when he went out to Dillingham and went up to Kotzebue. It doesn't include the media that he got in Seward, which was fabulous. This really is just the media from the Glacier Conference that was here. And that is at about $500,000 for us right now. Snow City Cafe has already estimated their influence of the president's visit, which we haven't counted in ours yet, at over $2 million. So I think for all of Anchorage, that alone will be significant. We are looking at what happened to the bed tax that week. And it was pretty phenomenal. The numbers, if you look year over year from that same week in 2014 to the same week in 2015, more than double. In fact, in one case, it was triple-digit growth for one night, which is phenomenal. I do have to say that sounds phenomenal, and it is. We have to temper it a little bit with that same night last year was Labor Day. It fell on that same day. And holidays traditionally are our lowest bed tax days. So if you look at 4th of July, you look at Labor Day, you look at Memorial Day, bed tax is always, so we're looking at a super day to a really bad day rather than a super day to an average day. But the bed tax bump that we expect to see, and that's what I don't have exactly yet, is phenomenal. And certainly that's a great question relating to, are you managing for economic impact, or are you managing for profit to the building? And the economic impact of that conference was phenomenal, and actually it was great for the bottom line of the building too. So that was good on two counts. The other thing that conference has done for us, we've got some fabulous photo images now. Things like the translation booths. And you saw how beautiful the facility looked on TV, some of those photos. And if we ever have a meeting planner that says, well, our group is too complicated, our technical requirements are too much, we need security, we can just say, look at this portfolio. And so from a sales perspective, it was a very important meeting for us as well. And so it has a number of ways that will affect our ability to sell in the future. So great question, thank you. And Bill.
Yeah, they rented the building, the entire building, for 5 days. So it was a great boon to our revenue. They say the check's in the mail, but anyhow, it's the federal government, so we're not counting on it for about 45 days. But
at least you're going to get it.
But we will get it. We will get it. So, talk just a little bit about why we have a management company as opposed to why Visit Anchorage just doesn't run the buildings. When we renewed their contract 5 years ago, we looked at that and did a cost analysis on it to determine if that might be a better way to go. Some of the reasons that we chose to stick with SMG is that we negotiated a very favorable contract, and basically, they don't get paid any flat fee or anything for managing the buildings. They only get paid when they generate revenue and subsequently a net profit within that revenue department. And it's based on a percentage. So in food revenue, if they generate a net profit in that department, they get 5% of what that net is. So they only make any money when we do well. And I think that's a win-win contract and puts us in a really good situation. So we have good cost control on our management contract. They also have, because they manage over 100 facilities, they have extremely good buying power, much better buying power than we would have as Visit Anchorage or even coupled. So that's a real plus. They also have a national name, and for our sales team out there, Alaska has some challenges in selling. Some people think it's a little cold, and we may still live in igloos up here. So there's a few folks like that left in the world, I guess. So they have a nationally recognized name, and that's very powerful when we're looking at national and international groups. They also have tremendous resources in terms of sale, keeping us up to date on industry trends with other convention centers. Their legal counsel in terms of any issues that might come up. We have one we're working our way through now with the death that occurred in the building. And they have great resources within operational expertise, not just within the management team here, but also their corporate staff. They also are good in terms of cost control and working with us on capital projects. So a lot of times when we want to do a capital project, we'll look at what's happening, like the Wi-Fi. We looked at what the latest Wi-Fi upgrades were out in the industry, so that when the RFP went out for new Wi-Fi here, 7 years old is old news and technology, we were able to put in that bid really the latest in terms of what our needs would be for today and going forward. And then the other thing is because they do manage the Sullivan Arena, we share some joint costs. So in other words, we have the same accounting for all of the SMG managed buildings and this building. And we pay for that, but we pay only a percentage as opposed to having to have a full-blown accounting staff within the two buildings. We also share some other things. A lot of times if we have concerts and we don't do near as many as SMG or require near as much security because of their sporting events, then we'll use their security people here, so we don't have to have a trained security staff, because a concert we would need up to 20 security people, and obviously our security staff here on an ongoing basis is much smaller. So there's some really good reasoning for why we have SMG as a management company. We have a great working relationship with them. I wanted to talk just a little bit about capital improvements. Since 2006 to present, we've spent in excess of $6 million on really the Egan Center, okay? Because it's 30-some years young, okay? It's a Project 80s building. And similar to some of the other Project 80s buildings, I don't have to tell you assembly members that, they needed some work, okay? And so the good news is none of that came from taxpayers, okay? And in fact, in the original Denina bond, there was money in that bond to do an upgrade on the Egan, because it was apparent it needed some sprucing up cosmetically and also mechanical things. So we received about $2.2 million from that bond sale that was put into enhancements to the Egan Center. We've also received about $2.3 million in state grants. I think that gravy train is over for a while, but we have received about $2.3 million. So we actually redid the roof on the Egan Center. We installed the new escalators and some other projects that are being added on to those funds that were available. And then the additional actually comes from the Capital Improvement Fund. And the two buildings, on their gross revenue that they generate, both centers, we take 4% of that and we put that into a Capital Improvement Fund. And so it generates depending on sales, between $260,000 and $300,000 a year. So, and we had that fund built up at one time in excess of $1 million. So all of the additional projects that we've been doing have been coming out of that fund. So none of the money from the capital fund within the Denina model has ever been utilized. They've all come from those three sources. And capital projects is an ongoing thing. If you defer $500,000 investment, it doesn't mean you don't need that $500,000. It just means the next year you need that $500,000 plus whatever you need then for the next year's things. We've been able to pretty much stay pace and maintain the Egan Center. And we've done a lot of things. We've remodeled the restrooms and completely replumbed them. The original Egan Center had galvanized pipe, so I guess somebody wasn't planning on keeping that building for a while because that's good for about 20 years. It doesn't work. New escalator, as mentioned, new roof. We've replaced the interior and exterior doors in certain locations. Put in a new Arctic entry where we had a revolving door, which in Alaska they don't work so good. And on and on. New carpeting, new banquet chairs, so on and so forth. And then we've also tried to continue to address energy needs because these two buildings use a lot of energy. And obviously when natural gas went up 21% in 1 year, that was a pretty good size hit for us. But we've continued to work hard on energy management, and we actually have done that by in the stairwells in both of the buildings, including the Denina Center. They are in photocells because we have these large egress exit corridors, in the event there's an emergency. And we now have them on a photocell. So instead of running 24 hours a day, 7 days of the week, they only come on when somebody is in the stairwell. We've also used LED lighting in some of the public areas, which has been a big energy savings and actually paid for the investment in less than 2 years in the area that we used it. And I mentioned the air curtains already, so we've talked about that. And we're currently right now working on doing some things with solar. We looked at wind with ML&P. They actually approached us. It didn't seem to pencil out, but we're now looking at solar. We just now are in the preliminary stages, have a couple of proposals. What we're looking at right now is potentially solar panel here that would be utilized for the domestic hot water. It would be a fairly easy installation because the boiler room is on the top floor above the ballroom. So with the solar panel, that's where the actual the holding tank and the boiler is. So we're hoping that would be a cost-effective way to defer some natural gas. And then the other thing we're looking at is, because we have the skylights here, and so it takes up quite a bit of roof space on the third floor. At the Egan Center, we have a total flat roof. So we're looking at the Egan Center as possible solar panels for assisting with our energy needs and reducing our energy costs. In terms of the buildings, we do around 650 to 700 events a year between the two buildings. And it's kind of hard sometimes to put that into perspective. What does that mean? Convention centers, can't run 80% occupancy. Maybe in Vegas they can, I don't know. But there are Sundays and Mondays are relatively slow dates unless there are conferences. Most people don't want a banquet on Sunday or a meeting. But we compare ourselves to just see how we're doing with other facilities of comparable size. And a lot of other facilities, we're doing 650 to 700 events a year. They're doing around 300. So we're actually doing quite well. We feel we can always do better. Phyllis and her team are working on that. But we feel good about the position we are in terms of activity in the building. And just to give you an idea, in addition to conventions, we do about 70% of our business is state and local business. So if we didn't have these two buildings, we would have a serious amount of events that really wouldn't have a place to go. And you could say, well, they could go to a hotel, etc. But the hotels actually are doing quite well with their meeting rooms too. So it really creates more capacity and more economic impact. And especially it's really great for downtown. The more economic impact and the more vibrant our downtown is, the better it is for the community and the better it is for tourism. So we feel real good about the number of events we're doing, and we're going to take a little dip, unfortunately, as we go into 2016 because some of our large users have pulled back a little bit. They happen to be oil companies, and I guess they're not doing as well as they used to. So we're going to have to work hard to try to make that up. But if you look at it financially, every year we've performed way above the performance model. And actually 2 years we actually generated a positive bottom line, which does not happen in convention centers. So just to give you an idea, we feel real good about the financial performance, but we know we can always do better. So I'll take any questions. Yes, Patrick. Go ahead.
Well, Phyllis mentioned we're on our tour that you guys use Ticketmaster for the occasional concert here.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of your contract with SMG?
It is. And it's based on the gross of it, then they do a rebate. So, and we get a percentage because, of course, the Sullivan Arena with the Aces and also UAA hockey generate a lot more tickets than we do. But that's another example of a joint partnership where we, in essence, then benefit by the combined gross of the two entities.
They don't really have a product, they just, we have a ticket office over here 2 blocks away. That's-
And I talked to them before the last time we renewed the Ticketmaster contract, because we do try to do things on a local level. And if you look at when we bought a lot of the furnishings and stuff, that was our focus. And they're really not set up to quite do what we need to do. And the thing about a concert, they get booked fairly quickly and they go on the street fairly quickly. So they need to be able to set up the seating chart and get out to sales very quickly. And they just weren't at that time. They may be now, but at that time they were not able to really mobilize fast enough to meet that need. So, but it's something we can look at too in the future. Jennifer?
What's your percentage as far as usage between the Egan Center and the Denine Center?
I don't have percentages. I can give you gross numbers though. So I just don't have them. I don't have them available currently percentage. But the Denina in 2011 had 420 events. The Egan had 260. The Denina in 12 had 429. The Egan had 244. In 2013, the Denina had 467. The Egan 208. And in 2014, we had 399 here in the Denina and 268 in the Egan. And sometimes, we let the customer pick the building. It's really the client's decision if the space is available. But sometimes it's cost effective to have everything in one building for certain dates because we have 2 kitchens and it's a lot cheaper to run 1 kitchen on one given day than 2. So we operate the 2 buildings really like one. We have 1 general manager over both buildings. We have an assistant general manager that actually is housed and operates out of the Egan Center. But we have 1 director of sales for both buildings. Our sales team sells both. We have 1 director of maintenance for both buildings. So they really operate as an entity. But it's clear that obviously clients want the Denina first. It's newest. And it's going to take us a little while to continue to build that revenue. But we do have some clients that specifically like the Egan. And we have some financial incentives on weekends for people utilizing the Egan. So sometimes if they're budget conscious, the Egan becomes a better alternative for them than the Denina Center.
And this is kind of an off-the-wall question. You might not be the one to ask. But Mr. Flynn and I have both looked at times as far as the library downtown and being in already a municipal-owned building. And have thought times that the Egan Center would be a great spot because really a downtown library isn't just for Anchorage, but it would be great for the visitor industry. And I don't know, I know that Patrick has probably mentioned it a couple times, and if it's something that you have on your radar.
We've had originally, when Mary J. Michaels was the director, she was looking at potentially the Egan, and we found that the load level on the main floor will not support a library. I guess books are heavy. And so the load levels, the capacity load level of the main Explorer Hall would not support a library. At least that's what I was told. I didn't see the study.
So as we look into the future, of course, the library is a totally different beast now.
Well, that was just then. I'm just giving you a little history on it.
Right.
So it has been worked on. Then the second was in the Sullivan administration. They contacted us and wanted to meet right away. We met with their senior management team, and there's grant money, or it was a gift donated for X amount of money specifically for a downtown library. So we talked about more of a small area that could be more computer-based and where people could check in and check out things. There would be some real benefits because we're open Monday through Friday for set hours, okay? And so then they wouldn't have to, wouldn't have a big utility bill. They wouldn't have to have a janitorial staff. We have security. So there could be some cost savings for a library operating in a small area. And we proposed a couple small spaces, around 800 square feet, because I guess in some communities now they do these smaller areas with computers and that type of thing. And then we never heard any more about it. So
Just
obviously,
as long as the conversation continues.
yeah. So we're totally open to it, and we came up with 2 areas in the lower lobby of the Egan Center that it could be utilized, and we thought that we could definitely provide some cost savings because they wouldn't have to have a janitorial service. We'd charge them a small fee for cleaning the area every day. Our maintenance staff would change light bulbs, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That actually is anything we had prepared. You had some great questions. I don't know if there's still some further questions. Ernie, what do you have?
I really don't have a question, Julie. I'm kind of like Wednesday night when we watch everybody get up and want to be the last person to speak, and finally Mr. Trainee said, "Get your butt down here and sit if you're going to speak and not." I've served on the board of Visit Anchorage basically since I've been on the assembly or most of the time. But I hope that we all learned a lesson this year. We're at the night of the meeting, we're going to okay a contract, and all of a sudden there's a motion to delay it for 2 weeks because we've got questions about oversight, et cetera, and so forth. And we need to be really careful about that. And I think what we have to understand, both you as a board and we as an elected body, is we should do this at least once a year. Continuity is incredibly important, as well as that institutional memory. Now, in the next 2 years, we're going to lose half the assembly body. And with that body, we're going to lose a lot of the people that were here when this began. And you're sitting there, and we honestly got one email that caused a whole lot of angst for a lot of people. And I think if we're able to come together like this once a year and get an understanding about what you do and what our responsibilities are and how we got here, because this was set up right when it began, but there's a lot of people on the assembly that has no memory of that, and there are a lot of people on your board that have no memory of that. We've got a great system in place. It works really well. And the one thing that we know about the tourism business, particularly with conventions, is that business is built on continuity within an organization as well as relationships that get developed over years. So when the time comes that a decision is made that, boy, it's time that we look at going a different direction, that's going to cause a lot of upheaval, and I guarantee you it will have a tremendous impact on business for a number of years to come. So it's important that we get together on a regular basis, not just with Visit Anchorage, but with the Performing Arts Center and the museum, so that assembly members, we kind of hang on to that institutional memory so it gets passed from generation to generation, because honestly, the assembly is the one thing that we do have continuity in, because we know when an administration changes, that can be 100% change and everybody's out the door. But we've always, on this body, had people that have been there and carry that knowledge forward. So it is just critical that we create these relationships, and we need to do this at least once a year so that new members, and the irony is some of our new members aren't here today, but it's important that new members have a chance to pick up on this. And you know what the really cool thing about this tour today is? This building is what brought my son back from Fairbanks. My son worked for SMG. He was the food and beverage manager at the facility up there. And when this opened, they recruited him to come in and be the first food and beverage executive chef in this building. So it brought my son back to Anchorage. And the amazing thing is, when I was walking through here today, the number of people that I see that have been here from the day the doors of this building opened that are still working here. So it's obviously a pretty good place to hold a job and be employed. So we got a lot of good things going, but we honestly could lose it pretty quickly if we don't keep that memory, that institutional memory going, so that the next time we get an email that says, wait a minute, we don't have oversight, we as a body immediately reply, and you have no idea how much oversight we have over that operation. And quite honestly, they don't spend a nickel without us being aware of it and how it's being spent. But that's real important for us to remember.
Thank you, Aaron.
Great comments. Thank you, Arnie. Any other? Well, again, I truly appreciate your time. I hope you learned something or were reminded of something today, that you enjoyed the tour and the lunch, and thank you for all that you do. And you've got all of our business cards if there's other questions, and we'll do this at least once a year, Ernie. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.